All right, welcome back to another episode of Phoenix Edge. This is an RPG podcast, and today we're going to be discussing Dragon Quest V. Now, this is one of those games in which, and Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, but it came out originally in Japan, and then it didn't actually come out officially in the United States for quite some time, right?
That is correct, because unfortunately, while Dragon Quest is a major franchise in Japan, it is more it's not that it's not that here in America. It did decent sales, but the sales started getting worse and worse by the time it was getting to Dragon Warrior 4.
Sure.
So I believe for a while, Enix kind of skipped out on the Super Nintendo era, and Dragon Quest as a series didn't come back until 7 on the PlayStation 1. So they completely skipped 5 and 6.
Yeah, I was reading up on it, and it's kind of strange how successful it is in Japan and how, I don't want to say unsuccessful, because obviously they still release games here, but it's nowhere near the same success as it is in Japan. And it's crazy, it seems like, how popular it is over there, because I was reading online that Universal Studios in Japan, evidently, I don't know if they still have it, but for quite a long time, they actually had a section of the park that was dedicated to Dragon Quest. Like, it's that big, like, you know, and the creatures that are in the games, like the slime. Apparently that's like a pretty popular figure you'll find on t-shirts and such, and even at like Walmarts and such like that. Like, it's a big deal over there, and I know for a long time, Enix was really trying to make that happen in the United States, but for whatever reason, they just couldn't seem to make it happen here. So it's kind of strange because here in the United States, Final Fantasy really took off, but in Japan, like, it's still pretty popular in Japan. It's not like it's abysmal sales in Japan, but Dragon Quest far outsells Final Fantasy in Japan, and it's kind of weird how it's almost the opposite effect, you know?
Yeah, it's kind of a little bit of a mystery on why it doesn't work in America. But the thing that a lot of people come to agreement to, which I am also, is that there are certain aspects of Final Fantasy, like aesthetically and story wise, that appeals more to a Western audience than an Eastern one. Despite Final Fantasy being popular itself in Japan, but the Dragon Quest series has a heavy nostalgic factor for Japanese. So, like, when each one comes out, it's like you notice that a lot of the sales are coming from like older folk, and it's not a coincidence that like Dragon Quest X, that was an online game, was its lowest selling Dragon Quest ever, because a lot of the Dragon Quest fans are older people, ranging from like yours and my age to up in the 40s and 50s. There's even like senior citizens in Japan who are active Dragon Quest fans that are, those are fun to read up about. So when an online game came out, it was like, we don't have time to play this. It's like, we love its Dragon Quest, but we just don't have the time. That's why the sales are so low. And the funny thing is, when the 3DS remake of Dragon Quest VII came out, it blew Dragon Quest X out of the water in sales. So it's a pretty clear indication that, there's definitely younger people that play it, but like the older audience has a nostalgic factor for it in Japan, and that's a heavy sale right there. But I think even regardless, Dragon Quest is going to continue to be popular because stuff like that passes on to the next generation. And that's the same thing with like Final Fantasy over here. It's like being introduced to a young generation. Another factor is definitely the art style. As much as I love Akira Toriyama's work, it's one of my personal favorites. It's not an appealing art style as compared to like Final Fantasy for Western.
Yeah, well,
players.
I mean, it's kind of, I know what you mean, in that I feel like Final Fantasy in general, its sensibilities tend to be a little more westernized than a Dragon Quest. However, when you speak of the art style, I can see where you're coming from, but isn't he the same guy that designed like the Dragon Ball Z characters, right?
Yeah, Akira Toriyama's
that's
done
very
stuff like
big
Dragon
in the
Ball
United
Z,
States, I feel like.
Yeah. And Chrono Trigger also.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know. Like I think almost maybe not the style, but the design. Because I know for just, I'm not going to be like negative right here, like right out the gates. But if I had to say why it might uh, Americans might have a hard time with it at first, is when you run up to like monsters, for example, and like the slime's like smiling the whole time. It's kind of jarring. You're like, why are you smiling? You're supposed to be this like ferocious beast. And so maybe more the design element maybe kind of loses its charm in the
The
translation.
lighthearted element to it can be a little or a little off-putting for people. I mean, I'm perfectly fine with it. I love it that way. But like you're saying, you're exactly right, is that the lighthearted tone of the game and the kind of friendlier look to it can be maybe unappealing to Western players that are more accustomed to medieval realistic fantasy. That's definitely not the case with everyone, but on a general consensus, especially in the 80s, that's why you see on Dragon Warrior covers that everything looks more Western. If you look at the covers, it's like your traditional medieval fantasy looking generic cover arts, and that was because they were under the belief, and I think they were right to believe that, was that the cartoonish look was not going to be appealing to people. So they're like, let's put this really cool looking knight in front of a fire breathing, realistic looking dragon in this artwork, and this will get it to sell. Mm-hmm. And, it kind of, it would be interesting to study why it didn't do it. Maybe it was just too late to the game.
Sure.
These Dragon Warrior games were for the NES because they were already releasing Dragon Warrior 3 and 4 while the Super Nintendo was being released.
Yeah, that's the other thing too. You can't, when you release games at the end of the console, no matter how successful the series is, that game tends to struggle.
I think it could pull like a Mega Man that was still doing decent sales. Mm-hmm. With Mega Man 5 and 6, despite the Super Nintendo already being out.
Sure.
I think it might have thought it could bank off that, but I'm not really sure what made them think that, because Dragon Warrior 1 sold not so well that they packaged them in Nintendo Power magazines to motivate people to play the later games, and that didn't work either.
Yeah, it's kind of strange because the more research I've done into why it didn't sell, there's like really no good reason. I mean, even the Dragon Warrior engine that they used to make those early games on the regular Nintendo, that engine was actually, I read, later used to take Western games like Ultima 4, I believe, and 3, which were later recreated on the Nintendo, a streamed down version of it. But they actually were using the Dragon Warrior engine to remake those games just because it was, like this. It seemed like the standard. I know Square took a lot of influence from those games as well with their early Final Fantasy. So, I mean, I find it baffling they didn't release Dragon Quest V in the United States for so long because, I mean, I feel like that game would have done well. I mean, I played it this is my first time I played it this week. I went through it, some really long play sessions, and I really liked it. And I think that like it's pretty limited on the over the top like stuff that doesn't translate too well to more Western gamers. I mean, I think it's definitely got those elements in there that make it a Dragon Quest, obviously. But I mean, I think it would have done well in the United States, and I think part of the problem probably was just them not having confidence in the product, I guess. And
they kind of released it too late, I believe. Dragon Warrior. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, but sure. I think Dragon Warrior came out after Final Fantasy in America, or at least like trying to remember when the first one came out. I would have to do a little research on that myself also, but Final Fantasy sales just hurt Dragon Warrior so much in America. and when it comes to today, people are definitely more open to the style of Dragon Quest, and it's definitely a lot more popular in America than it used to be. It's definitely nowhere near the popularity of Final Fantasy, but it definitely stands enough on its own feet for Square Enix to believe that Dragon Quest should be localized to America. Just not right away. Not important enough to get it localized right away, like Final Fantasy 15. But I mean, I believe it holds enough ground now. They're definitely selling them over here, and I love that they do that.
Yeah, I think there's a reason for the games being I more of a market now than there were probably back in the early '90s, because you can see a shift culturally. I think especially with American gamers, with games like Kingdom Hearts that have primarily I wouldn't say a super old audience, but I was reading up where the target audience for those games was like 11 to 13, and Square was actually very surprised how popular those games were with older gamers in their 20s, because it has like Mickey Mouse and it has all these Disney characters, and they realized, wow, this has a nostalgic effect. And I think that, I don't know, that's kind of like trendy right now for you to like kind of be nostalgic about your childhood. Man. Yeah. So, I mean, that's probably going to work in Dragon Quest's favor, because I know Dragon Quest 11 is supposed to come out in the United States for, I think, 2018 summer, right? Supposedly.
It says to be decided 2018. They did say they're aiming for it 2018. We don't know exactly when. I'm hoping at least by the summertime, but the cynical part of me says winter 2018.
Yeah.
But I'm really hoping it's earlier than that, because that's like the number one RPG I'm looking forward to right now. Very
cool. Yeah, man. Me too. I mean, this was... I guess we should probably just dive into this game before we keep going. But this was my first Dragon Quest game. And if anyone's watching this that's not familiar with the series for some reason, right? Because we are going to have spoilers for this game. Caution. But Dragon Warrior in the United States, that was, I think, the first 3 games. And I guess they had to call it Dragon Warrior in the United States and Dragon Quest in Japan for legal reasons. However, over time, Square Enix was able to resolve those legal issues, so now they just call them all Dragon Quest.
I think the story is that the trademark for it disappeared, so they were able to go back to being Dragon Quest again. Perfect. Because it was still a thing up to Dragon Warrior 7 for PlayStation.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I think the trademark disappeared sometime between that and the DS re-releases.
Yeah, because that used to confuse. They used to confuse me because I saw everyone talk about Dragon Quest. And like I'd be like, wait, is this like a spinoff series? Because all I knew was Dragon Warrior, and somebody informed me of my ignorance with the series. So,
oh yeah, when I was little, it confused me too. It was, I was like, wait, Quest Warrior.
Man, there's Dragon Quest 9. Wait, there's 9 of these, and there's like 7 Dragon. It's it can be confusing. So hopefully that clarified it. And also, if you're wondering, Enix and Square, they used to be 2 separate companies. And early 2000s, they joined forces. So there's a lot of a lot of changes. So
rip the good old days.
Yeah, I think they were better companies when they were separate. But anyways, that's another discussion. So this was I don't want to say it's my first Dragon Quest game, because I played a lot of the first one on the regular Nintendo. I had it on an emulator, and I used to play that one a lot. I never beat it, but I just liked like how grind heavy it was. I like grinding in games, so it was quite a challenge. So I enjoyed that one, and then also there was one that came out on the Game Boy Advance. I think or not the Game Boy Advance, the Game Boy Color. They re-released it. I think now it was Dragon Quest 3.
That is actually the first Dragon Quest game I played, was 3 on the Game Boy.
Yeah, dude.
Game Boy Color, yes.
I rented that game from Blockbuster back when that was still a thing. And I was just a kid, obviously. And, dude, I actually went back and re-rented it because I convinced my mom. I was like, hey, you got to let me, I'm not done with this game. And I actually really, really liked it. I mean, I had a ton of fun with it. I couldn't believe that I had such a great time with a mobile RPG. I didn't realize at the time that it was just a re-release of an older game. So
yeah, man, it's a great one. I still have actually on my wall here. I still have it boxed up, original box and everything in the game cartridge from when I bought it as a kid. I didn't buy it as a collector. I just straight up kept that and kept it in good condition. Like I was obsessed with beating that game. Like, I wasted so many AA batteries beating that one because it's a really long game too for an NES game. Like, there's a lot of stuff you got to do. You can put like 50 hours into it and not be done with it.
Yeah, and that's the thing with this, especially with Dragon Quest V, that I noticed, because aside from those two games, that's only my real experience with this series personally. I think I actually rented the one that came out on the PlayStation, the first one that came out, was it Dragon Quest VII?
Yes.
Yeah, and I think if I remember correctly, it took like 3 or 4 hours or something like that for you to get in your first battle or something. I can't remember, but it was like a really long introduction, and I think I had also rented Final Fantasy Tactics also, so and that was the first time I played that game, so I went for Tactics because that immediately gripped me from the beginning.
Actually, fun fact. But fun fact about that is in the Dragon Quest VII 3DS version, they actually listened to criticism of that, and it actually takes a lot less time to get into the first battle of that game. They took a lot of the filler stuff out of the first dungeon.
See, and I think now that you've mentioned that, I remember reading that online. Isn't that kind of a little debate about some gamers are like really upset they did that? Or is it pretty well received? Like, yeah,
maybe
that was a good
people
idea.
who are like just like very much about keeping to the original. But honestly, I think that's probably one of my biggest issues with Dragon Quest VII, and they resolved that. I mean, it was just like less puzzles you have to do, less dungeon you have to traverse. Because I mean, that part felt really tedious, and taking like 80% of that tedious out, it was great to just get into the. It doesn't matter, but I'm sorry. Anyways, you were saying.
Yeah, what was I saying? Oh, well, anyways, I rented that game, and I rented Final Fantasy Tactics. I played Dragon Quest 7, and like it just, at the time, it was just taking a while to get started, so I jumped on Final Fantasy Tactics. I was like, let me see what this game's about, and that blew me away. Final Fantasy Tactics, obviously, that's a great game. So, unfortunately, I didn't give any more time to Dragon Quest 7, but aside from those games, off the top of my head, those are the only games I've played from this series until I picked up this one. This is supposed to be one of the better ones, at least within the community for Dragon Quest, right? Dragon Quest V.
It's one of my personal favorite ones.
It's one of your personal favorite ones?
5 and 8 are my favorite ones so far.
5 and 8, okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I was reading online, it seems like most people are pretty positive about this game. They really enjoyed it, and so let's just kind of see where it ranked, but very cool. Yeah, so I played it on the DS version. I was very, very conflicted about playing it on the DS because I tend to like to go to the original. I mean, if somebody told me that the first time they played Final Fantasy VI was on the mobile phone version, I would probably have a brain aneurysm. So, there's just this thing about playing it on the original. Like back when, they had limitations and they had a smaller budget. It was much more difficult for them to do it, and like just to see what they were able to do and show how much heart they put into a game. It just seems a lot more. I don't know. You're getting the actual experience instead of the B team working on this game on Fridays. But this DS version, I would say, is not one of those remakes. I'm going to use that word sparingly, but it really is a remake. But it's actually a very well done one. It seems rather faithful to the original. I did go back and play the Super Nintendo one for a couple of hours, and I played it for about 3 or 4 hours, and then I got back on the DS version and kept going with that one, and they're very, very much almost the same game from what I understand. I know there's a little bit of difference with how many characters you can have in the battle system, which obviously makes it a little bit easier, and then also how many wives you can get, right? But those are only the real differences.
You still can only have one wife.
Well, not okay. Options to choose, right? So, like,
yes, they added a new wife beyond Bianca and Nira, and it's Deborah.
Okay, is that? I thought it was just Deborah. Was it okay? I'm just not going to say that.
It is Deborah, but every time the way they spell it, for some reason in my head, it just keeps going Deborah. And actually, that's a Dragon Ball Z character now I think about it, how that's pronounced. But the way they spell it is like that. But yes, you're right. It's Deborah.
Okay.
But yeah, that's a third wife added exclusively to the DS version. story wise, after that, it much doesn't change between who you pick. Like your children look slightly different from it, depending like blue hair on their blonde hair for you choose Bianca, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And
the only real difference because I tried reading up on it because I wanted to make sure I was making the right choice, and I ended up choosing Bianca because that seems to be the most canon wife to pick. So it seems like, basically from what I understand, it seems as if Bianca was the canon wife, and she's kind of, for like combat, she's all purpose. She's pretty good at everything. She's not too bad at anything, but she's not fantastic at anything. Whereas Nira was good at magic, and then Deborah was really good at melee, right? Is that accurate? Mm-hmm. But it seems like the only real differences between them all is, like you said, with the children, and then when you're running around this world, you can occasionally talk to your group party members, and I guess, obviously they have different personalities, right?
Yeah, Bianca is more like a simpleton Southern type of girl, mm-hmm. and Nira is more like a kind-hearted girl, and Deborah is more like kind of a rich, spoiled woman.
Yeah, I was trying to read up, everyone was like hating on Deborah. They're like, yeah, she's really good if you want to choose her, but then you got to deal with her like calling you her slave like the rest of the game and stuff, and like people were either found it hilarious or like they just didn't like her. So
she's definitely an interesting pick. I don't think I'd recommend her for a first time, mm-hmm. but if you're playing the game for like a second or third time, it's interesting to pick her to see how it goes out.
Yeah. So,
but I would my always goes back to Bianca, because in the game, like, you have more history with her. You knew her as a child, and you had adventures with her and everything. And Deborah, you just kind of met. You know what the funny thing is on top of that? When you pick Bianca, Nira's father still offers to pay for the wedding.
Yeah, dude. And for like half the game, he's like giving you gifts and stuff. And I'm like, this is really weird and creepy. Like,
I feel like it's like he's doing the whole thing sarcastically. He's like, oh yeah, here, take all my money. Here, all the money you're going to do to marry my beautiful daughter. Why don't you go and marry someone else with it?
You need a ship?
Yeah, it's great. And he's just going on with the whole sarcasm bit the whole way through. Well, he's like, I'm so glad you got married with all my money.
It was really weird now that you're bringing that wedding scene. I like the wedding scene, but it occurred to me, and maybe I missed it, but Bianca's father, maybe he was too sick, I don't know, but he wasn't at the wedding, right? I don't remember seeing him, like, and it seemed kind of weird that like he didn't show up, but this like other guy that I'm not even related to is like paid for the entire thing. He like had like the prince come down, like it was this big whole thing, and her father didn't come down. I know you can visit him later and like they can have like a little scene and stuff, but it was just kind of weird how that guy really pushes himself in your life there, for sure. But yeah, it was good. So, in general, I really liked the game. I had a really good time with it. I was I'll be honest, about the halfway point, there's a couple of hours there where I was like starting to feel like, man, I'm not sure I like this game anymore. And then it started taking off again. And I think there's 3 stages in the game in the plot line, and I really like the first stage, and I like how that ended with them like getting enslaved and everything. I didn't see that coming. I was like, oh, Jesus Christ. And then after that, we go into this whole like little thing with Harry or whatever, the prince, and like dealing with that whole thing with his castle and like everything. To me, like the original plot like really took a nosedive after that. But once we got past that whole section, and you met up with your uncle and you saw Sancho again, and and you married Bianca and everything like that. It started to pick back up, and like I actually started to like get back invested in the story. But did you have any pacing issues with the story, or is it all
particularly? Just because I'm used to how Dragon Quest structure works, you gotta talk people and go to the next part of town. It's more the adventure aspect. Dragon Quest hasn't, until later Dragon Quest games, Dragon Quest hasn't been known to have like a very heavy narrative.
Hmm.
So there are points where you are on a trip of discovery and adventure for yourself. So I kind of take it that way. I see where you're coming from, and it's absolutely valid if you expect certain different things from an RPG for yourself.
Sure.
But me personally, I don't have a problem with it.
Hmm.
It for me, for as a Dragon Quest game, I thought it paced very well. And I'm a very big fan of how it does like a 3-generation type of thing, where you're like a child, first generation, and you're a late teen, the second generation, then you're a father, the third one. And I love that generation gap because it's crazy to go back to places you visit before and see how it is. It's like you first meet Harry as a kid, then you help him escape as a slave. In the second generation, the third generation, he's a father himself, and he has his own little troublemaker son that's really cool to see in itself. And he's like, oh man, I can't believe I was like that when I was a kid.
Yeah.
It's cool to see him progress as a character too. And other ones that joined you on your journey. It's cool to see Sancho again after you were a little kid, known him, and then he joins your group. And just how everything progresses. That something like that always fascinates me. Rather it's Dragon Quest or like a TV show where it's like there's like progression of a character in his growth, or from like youth to an adult.
Yeah, I mean, I really like that too. I mean, at first I wasn't quite sure what to expect because, he starts off. I named him Abel. Is that like the canon name?
I don't believe there's any canon name.
Because I noticed a lot of people were calling him Abel for some reason, so I was like, I'm just going to call him Abel. You know where that comes from?
Kind of tradition, and people can call me silly for it, but I always use my own name for Dragon Quest.
Oh, because it's supposed to be.
It's always been like that since I was a little kid. And I'm like, why break tradition? So I just put my own name in it, unless it's like I'm playing as a female character. For a playthrough, then I'll come up with a different name.
Like
but,
Erica.
on my first playthrough, I usually pick my name for it.
Okay. Well, I chose Abel. So, I mean, he's playing. It kind of threw me off because you're playing as like a little kid at first. And, I got used to it because I saw what they were doing. They were building up a lot of story with you and his father. And he's like taking care of you and he's healing you and everything like that. And that did make his death scene later that much more impactful, but I didn't expect the whole generation thing to happen, right? Where he goes from a kid to, an adult. And then I pretty much expected it to end right there with the age progression. I didn't expect us to go a step further with him having his own children and like getting married and, just doing this whole like long thing with his kids, going from babies to like, however old. It's just, I didn't expect that whole thing. And I think you really have to play the game from beginning to pretty much in the end to actually get a grasp of what kind of story they're trying to tell there. Because to me, all I knew about this series was what I've played before. And then I always it's always used at the same time with like Final Fantasy, right? So I kind of expected like it to be more Final Fantasy-ish, with like this huge cast of characters and everything like that, and they all have their own like story arcs and like very like story driven. And it took me a while to realize that the game was more, like you said, about adventure and exploration. And it did have like at the end of each act, you would say it did have fairly long story development, but it seemed like there was a very clear distinction between okay, now we're doing gameplay and then now we're doing story.
No, when I first played the game, it was on like a translated Super Nintendo ROM.
Right.
You can see behind me, actually, I got the original Dragon Quest V copy for Super Famicom, but of course I had to play a translated version to get it. But I first played it when I was younger, when like earlier 2000s I first started playing it, because there was a translated version for it. So I had no idea it did a generation thing, because it was just called Dragon Quest V, not Hand of the Heavenly Bride. And I didn't get to see much box art for it. I just downloaded the ROM and went with it. Yeah. I had no idea that that I was going to I thought I was just going to be a kid for it. And there's games out there that you're a kid and like Zelda sometimes, and I just kind of went with it. And then I found out oh, hey, I'm I'm an adult now. That's pretty cool. I guess that was segment for just a kid segment. And then you go through it, and I find out, oh, well, wow, there's a whole third generation of this. Now I'm a daddy. And I thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
And the twist, and I love the twist to this game's story that's that blew my mind also, with like the whole third generation thing. With like when you start out in the first generation, it's like you're with your father Pancras, and he's like looking for the legendary hero, and you're thinking to yourself, oh, it's going to be you. Like, you're going to be the legendary hero
that's
who
what,
is
that's what I
actually
thought
looking
too.
for.
I was like sitting there like thinking like, okay, come on, Dad. Like, clearly it's me. Come on.
And then the second generation, you're taking his, continuing his quest to find the legendary hero, and you have like the Zenithian equipment that you can't equip. But at the time I was thinking, oh, it's going to be me. Someone's going to come out and tell me that it was me the whole time. That was a legendary hero that you're looking for. But it turns out, not you either. It's the third generation. And you find out that your son is the legendary hero.
Yeah, and it kept throwing me off because the game would be like, we'd have these scenes where they're like, oh, only the legendary hero can, like wear this helmet or, use this sword. And like, it would be like, he could almost do it, but he couldn't. And I thought, okay, like he's going to have to like pull like a Final Fantasy IV Cecil and like climb to the top of a mountain or something and like fight himself or something, and then like he'll like afterwards he'll be able to like pick up the sword. I was expecting like something to happen that like that would change him, and then he would finally be the hero or whatever. I did not expect to have to wait till his generation, and I was almost kind of like a little insecure with how strong my kids were in the game. I mean, I was still stronger, but just seeing how quickly they were developing these like sick spells and such that were like, I could easily tell like if I developed them, they would like far exceed my own abilities. And, it was kind of crazy.
That's something that still kind of bothers me about the game. I mean, I quickly got over it, but taking your children along an adventure to the demon world to fight the demon that has your their grandmother sealed away. It's like, come on, kids, we need to go save Grandma.
Yeah, well, first off,
demon world.
I feel bad for Grandma. She's been like a prisoner for like 35 years now.
Yeah, I mean, because you've ultimately been on the search for your mother, and finding the legendary hero would tie your way into finding her, because that was Pangras's whole journey also, was to find his wife, which was your mother, which was your children's grandmother. And you finally find her at the end, and she sacrifices herself to save you all from, I believe, final boss's name, Murdaugh, I believe. Like the true evil of the thing. But that was paced very well. But like I said, it's really weird that your children are... I was kind of thinking that, like, okay, is there like a fourth generation that's going to happen where they're like, he's a teenager and he takes it on, or like he takes your place of the hero, and it's like, no, he just beats him as a kid? I'm like, okay, these kids have to be like 7 to 8 years old, and he's carrying the Zenithian equipment that was once carried by the hero from Dragon Quest IV that was like a teenager to an adult wearing that. And I got the kid wearing it. It just felt a little off, but I guess that's just kind of the charm or humor or approach that the Dragon Quest team and Akira Toriyama, the designer, are usually known for. So today I'm definitely more open to it, but like back then I was just kind of scratching my head. I was like, what?
Yeah, well, there are several, like the game flows from being, I think, story-wise really rough to being like really good. And it's like a pendulum that keeps going back and forth, because I would notice you would have odd things like, let's see, I have something written down here. When Maria was in our party, she's with us in the slave camp, and then she later marries Harry. At some point she like leaves the party, but like there's no like discussion about it. I mean, it's like little things like that to me stuck out as being like really rough from a narrative perspective. And I kind of wonder if it's because I was playing the DS version that it seemed so apparent to me. Whereas if I had played it on the Super Nintendo, it may have not been more as apparent because I would have given it more slack because it's on the Super Nintendo, you know. And there's a couple of things like when my character needed to go out after he became the king of Gotha or whatever. You know, all the soldiers and everyone in the kingdom was like, "No, you can't go out. You're a king. That's ridiculous. We'll go out." And then like an hour later, they're like, "Oh no, that's fine. You can go out." Like, you know, and I'm like, I'm going like all over the place trying to, you know, find my wife and everything like that. I mean, there's like just a lot of like little things like that like if you want to be really picky, it is kind of like kind of rough, like plot holes almost, but they can easily be resolved. But it is a little rough, I noticed, around the edges. But the heart of the story is actually very, very good. So,
Yeah, the DS version is very faithful to the Super Nintendo one in many ways. I think there's just some slight small adjustments to make it easier on the casual level to play it. But overall, I mean, just like the pacing and the story, like it's very minimal what they mess with. And that's most of the ports, how they are.
Sure.
4, 5, and 6 are very faithful to their original game, mostly.
Yeah, I mean, and I was kind of surprised with how faithful they were because there are certain things that I probably would have done if they gave me a chance to go. Like if I made the original, you know, somehow I created that game, right? If I got the chance to go back later and mess with it, I could imagine me going in there and being like, well, let me just, you know, make some character animations, make them look a little smoother, things like that. But they just pretty much kept the same thing. And like, that's not a knock on them at all. Cause that's pretty brave to just be confident in your product like that. Like, hey, now we're just going to stick with the exact original. We're fleshing out this artwork, making it look more appealing. But, as far as, like I was saying with like character animations, I was surprised that, you know, we didn't have any, over the top character animations like we saw with like Chrono Trigger, with like, you know, like their eyes getting big or stuff like that, right? It's pretty much a standstill sprite, so you have to let the dialogue do the story, which is fine. You know, it wasn't that detracting, but it's just things like that made me realize like, okay, like this is actually a very, very faithful version of this game, you know?
You know, it's funny you say that because there actually is a PS2 remake for Dragon Quest V.
Yeah, and that only came out in Japan, right? Right.
Yep,
okay.
I'm actually holding it in my hand right now. We'll pull it up to the camera here.
Cool.
And to the back of it. It's for the most part like another faithful remake of it. But it's like in 3D models, like everything is 3D looking.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't do anything like Dragon Quest VIII where it's like full on like character models based off the artwork, but it does a lot of 3D. I mean, but it's basically like just like a 3D port over it. It's a pretty good one also. It's not one that features the Third Bride. That wasn't until the DS remake. Sure. But if you're looking for like an updated refresh version of the Super Nintendo, I believe they do make like fan translations of it. If you truly want to play the PS2 version, I personally think the DS version is the best version to play, but the DS or the Android iOS version, that version's actually really good because, you know, it's purely a turn-based combat game, so touchscreen works great for it.
Sure.
I played on that, but yeah, that one was pretty good also. I wouldn't call it like a full-on remake, but I mean, it's pretty good.
Yeah, apparently from what I've read, the general consensus with it is the PS2 version is beautiful and it's really enjoyable to play for just because it's graphically, it looks amazing. Or I don't want to say amazing, but it looks really, really good. And it kind of like gives you a different experience if you're already familiar with the game. However, people are not apparently over the moon with the fan translation, especially when you compare it to the DS version. Because I mean, even I noticed the localization on this game was just fantastic. Like the dialogue in general just had a very glossy tone to it that you can tell like somebody went through and they really put some work into this. you know?
Oh yeah, I mean the effort's definitely there. Um, I I know I think it may have been Square Enix that did the local translation for 4, 5, and 6, but I believe Nintendo did 9, and I
Okay.
think they're doing 11 also. I wouldn't. I know they did 9, but I'm not sure if they did 4, 5, and 6. I wouldn't quote me on that one, but I do agree with you. The localization on these games is quite fantastic, especially since like they give a lot of characters like French accents and Scottish accents and
Yeah, I
Southern
noticed that,
accents on
and I
top
was
of
like,
that,
dude,
and
this is crazy.
they
Yeah.
still localize that. I don't know if it's like that in the Japanese version, but they definitely do it for the English version, and and they put effort into it. I gotta give them strong props for that.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, just all in all, it was really, really well done. I think what aspect of the game that felt obtrusive to me was, I don't know if it's just they were trying to pad the game out, but there's sometimes they would do things that would just annoy me. Like, for example, I think what's the name of the town? It starts with a Z, Zoomington or something like that. But it's this town that's like so complicated to like navigate. It's got all these different it's almost like a maze. And I thought maybe it was just maybe I was tired, maybe I was having just a rough day. But then I talked to one of the NPCs and they're like, "Man, this place is crazy. How does anyone get around in here? I got lost." I'm like, I'm like, why would you make a town like this? Like,
Is that the town that's like like at the very top of a mountain where you're going like around a lot of staircases, or?
no, that's a different one. I'm thinking of it's basically you walk in and like immediately right there, thank God, is the inn. But then you have to go. Basically, the reason you're in that town is you have to talk to that old man that gives you the spell Zoom.
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about now. Yeah, I remember getting lost in there. You don't get it's not when you get lost in the Super Nintendo version, but like the DS version is just like with the 3D camera and everything.
Yeah, I'm
It
just
throws
like,
you
dude,
off a lot.
I'm just trying to like get to the freaking weapon shop. Jesus Christ! And then the armor like only sells armor at night for some reason, which I'm sure his sales are plummeting. But so then you get there and you're like, oh my God, I gotta change it tonight now to buy some armor. So then it resets you at the beginning of the city again. So I mean stuff like that. I don't know if they just they thought it was kind of humorous, but I didn't appreciate stuff stuff like that.
I mean, they are known to poke around with the players once in a while. They do. Yuji Horii and them do have a good sense of humor.
Well, that's what I mean. Like I thought like maybe it was just me. And then I talked to one of the NPCs they put in the freaking game. Like one of the characters in the game, I just went up and talked to him. And he was like, "Man, I'm lost. This place is really hard to find, like navigate." And I'm like, "You guys knew this was going to be ridiculous." So I guess it was on purpose. So I can't call it bad game design if it was done on purpose. But
You can still call it annoying, even if it was.
oh yeah, I'm going to call it that. I'm not. But yeah, so I mean, there was that, and then there was a couple of areas where I felt like the encounter rate was just through the freaking roof. Especially when you're in the ship and you have to go through this like cave in the water before you can get to like I think it's called the Lofty. So I can't remember the name of the place, but it's basically where your main character's mother supposedly came from. But you have to go through this like not underwater, but this like water cave. And it's like every like 2 seconds, it's just random encounter. And I'm like, dude, I'm just trying to get through here. It was ridiculous. And there was quite a few areas where I noticed that they like really upped the encounter rate. And it was just, I really did not like when they did that. I hate when games do that. I'm just like, you're artificially stretching your game out when you do this. I don't know if they're trying to prepare me for the next area. Maybe that's what they were doing, but
I guess it depends for me. If like I'm in the middle trying to figure out a puzzle and encounter rates keep coming up, it'll frustrate me. If I'm just traversing through something and battles aren't that tough, which in Dragon Quest games are usually not, as long as you know what you have on you. It's usually easy to traverse through things. Unless you've been running from everything, then it's gonna be a chore to get through stuff. But most of the time, it's okay. My stance on random encounter rates are always different depending on the game and circumstance. just if enemies are easy to plow through, then I'm fine with encounter rates. But if like enemies are just like depleting my items left and right in my MP, then I'm getting frustrated over time with it.
Yeah, well, and there's a few areas where I felt as if that was the case. I mean, I really felt like this game was really pushing me to grind at quite a few spots, either for equipment or maybe monsters, maybe. I don't know. I really got the vibe from this game from reading online for strategies that depending on your choice of monsters, you can have a dramatically different experience with this game. Would you agree with that?
Yes, if you're capturing the right monsters, you can plow through the game very easily. If you're trying to stick with like the same monsters that you got at the beginning, you can still do that. You can still make it to the end of the game with them, but you're just making it more of a challenge on yourself. I mean, you can find good monsters like the Metal Slime Knight, who has very high defense and has like cure spells and everything like that. And that, monsters like that make things very easy.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I noticed too. Is like once I like kind of switched out some of their monsters and I got some new monsters, like the game would like all of a sudden be easier because mostly my main character was always good because I actually grinded a fair bit on my playthrough, but I think it was once I switched out some of the monsters, I had a little bit of easier time, and I kind of realized that's how the game was made for you to do, test out different characters or monsters, which leads me to my next point with this game that I really liked. The game forces you to really be strategic with how you fight because you can't just go to the shop and buy 99 Phoenix Downs, or you can't just have like an inventory packed with like ethers so you can just restore your MP. I mean, you have to be really careful with what you do in your party. You have to be careful with the monsters that you choose because if you have the wrong monsters with the wrong spells, you might not be able to get through a battle as easily. You might end up using too much MP. You won't be able to heal yourself. And, if you die, you can't, most of the time, you can't just revive yourself. I can't remember how you pronounce it, but the item in Dragon Quest, it starts with a Y. What's it called?
Yggdrasil.
Yeah.
Yggdrasil leaf?
Yeah, they're not as common as like other RPGs, right? So you have to actually go to like a church for the first half of the game and like actually pay money to revive yourselves or your monsters. And like, it's like there's actual consequences to doing the wrong thing in the battle system. So it really pays off to take the time to make sure you have characters that have the snooze spell, right? Or have techniques that can attack a whole line of enemies instead of just one. I mean, those spells are what make and break your battle,
Yeah, that's the biggest thing about Dragon Quest series in general is that being prepared is a big thing. And that's how kind of Final Fantasy was the first 3 games. And making sure that you have like up-to-date gear. That's why whenever I go to like towns, I actually grind a little bit of gold so I can get the latest equipment for everyone because I know that dungeons will be a little harder without them. So I think to myself, if I just grind enough gold, I'll naturally get levels from it too and get gear. It will be easier. And it turns out, it does most of the time. It's worth doing that endeavor. So preparation is a big thing in Dragon Quest. And if you're taking time to stock up well each time you go to a town, get the gear, rest up, everything like that, find everything you can in town, then you'll be smooth sailing to the next place you go to.
Yeah,
which
for sure.
Can be kind of contradictory for some people because some people don't like the grind. But unfortunately, Dragon Quest is a game that welcomes the grinding aspect of it. You don't have to. You can challenge yourself to it, but it's much easier on yourself if you take that like less than an hour to grind each time you go to a town.
Yeah, and like the other thing I liked with that too is you can't sometimes buying the weapon or armor that increases your stats the most isn't necessarily the best choice, depending on what other benefits come with, a weaker weapon or a weaker armor set, right? And I know you can see the same type of thing in all sorts of RPGs, but I noticed lately, and I actually just finished the game today, but I noticed that towards the end of the game, having a shield that like just blocked fire-based attacks was so much more useful, even if it was substantially weaker than a shield, for example, that would boost my defense by 30 points higher. Because if I was battling enemies that were just constantly barraging me with, flame attacks, like having something that would like either substantially reduce the amount of damage that would do, or just null it entirely, was way more valuable than just having stronger defense, right? Or if your weapon can attack like every enemy, like a lot of the boomerangs, that's way more useful most of the time than a weapon that boosts your attack 10 points higher but can only attack a single enemy, right?
That's what I love about the game, is that you can either try to go brute strength through it, which works, or you can play smart also and keep stuff in your bag and be like, oh, this is a dragon. If I put a shield on, I at least can keep one of my characters alive. That's the beauty of it. Sometimes people go and say, "Oh, Dragon Quest is such a simple RPG." It's, and you're kind of right, that is, but it's got a lot of depth to it. I mean, there's a lot of situations in each battle you go in that you can do to make things easier on yourself. And I think that's where a really good game lies, is when you are making a simple system, but you add lots of layers of depth to it. And that's another reason why Dragon Quest is such a highly revered series as it is, because it knows how to stay simple and it knows how to make you think.
One thing that I did not like about this game, though, and I think you're going to feel the same way, but we'll see here, is inventory management I thought was horrible. Like having
Dragon Quest tradition, man. That you got to be strategic with that too. You got to know what you need to put on your characters, and you need to know what needs to go in the bag. And that's strategy all in itself.
Yeah, dude. I just didn't like how each character had their own like items and stuff, and like, I don't know, it would just take a long time for me to find certain things. Like, it was just really, I found it really just annoying. So,
the one thing I wish they would have done is that the items would go straight to the bag, but they put them on characters and they fill up. And, when I'm trying to get like another certain item, it's like, this character's inventory is full. And it's like, I need to clear.
Yeah, well, I would like go up to a chest and I would get like an item and I'm like, oh, dude, that's exactly what I need. And then it would take me like 3 minutes to find it because I'm not quite sure who actually like picked it up, because all my characters' inventories are full, which I guess is my own fault because I should be routinely going through it. But it just seems like it would have been way easier if it just all went into like a main bag, like Final Fantasy, right? Or most other RPGs. And like you would just sort your own bag. Like I don't want like 16 different like bags that I have to like sit there and like mess with to like just equip an item. Or like I can't just click on the item and equip it. I have to like, if it's in somebody else's bag, I have to like transfer it over to the other person. And then if they don't have space, I got to like trade it with another item. Then I got to go into their inventory, click on it, and press equip. I'm like, dude, it took me a while to figure that out when I first started the game. And I just, whew. Are the newer games still like that?
It's like, okay, so I have a Yggdrasil leaf, but like, who do I give it to? I think I'll give it to my fighter type monster, because I already have a priest that can use Zing and Kuzing to revive a character. So if the priest goes out, then my fighter can use the leaf and revive her. Now, if you just made a main inventory bag, it's like you don't need to think about that. But, that's just a strategy in itself. You want to properly distribute your items to the right characters. Like, give medicinal herbs to characters that can't heal. Give, like, a Sage's Stone, which can heal, like, the whole party, to someone who isn't a priest. Mm-hmm. That's strategy in itself, and it's been like that since the second game.
Yeah. See, I can appreciate that, but I feel like they could have just as easily had another screen in which was like an equip, like non-battle equip item screen, which would just help me find items and just equip them to the characters I needed to, instead of me like rummaging around like all my different characters to find out where this armor or helm is, that I just found in a chest.
Yeah, that I can agree to. I can agree to the bag being more organized.
Mhm.
They kind of did better with that in 9. They have a equip, well, both 8 and 9, and
Yeah,
I believe the 7 remake have this. It's an equipment like menu specifically,
sure.
and like you pick, and they'll have like your basic equipment inventory screen to put on the characters, so
See, and
you don't have
that
to
would be
traverse through the bag looking for them.
an amazing addition to this game that I think would improve my experience so much. And
I
that's like
think
the
if they
type,
remade it today, they would put it in, but that's more of a recent thing.
yeah. Well, I mean, that's the type of thing where I was like when I was playing the DS version, I was like, wow, I'm surprised they like left this like old styled thing in there. So yeah. But you know, it's you kind of get used to it after 15 or 20 hours. That's kind of a long time, but you know, once you get used to it, it's not so bad. So I think the only other thing that I'm trying to look here. I have some notes of things I didn't like with the game. Let's see.
Better not be the soundtrack, because the soundtrack is beautiful.
Yeah, I like the soundtrack, but there were certain things that I noticed that they did that I didn't like. Like, for example, every castle-like area would have the same music, which was kind of like I was hoping for like each locale to have its own tune instead of just being like, okay, well, this is the castle music, or the kingdom music. Do you know what I mean? Like where you go to every new kingdom and every new kingdom starts off with that same exact music. It's good, but I just I would have appreciated something that was written for each specific area, if that makes sense. But I
Yeah.
mean, it is really well done, and specifically, I really like the overworld theme. I was thinking, man, I want to listen to that later. After this podcast, it's really catchy.
Yeah,
But
it's been the same composer since 1.
yeah, I was
He's
looking
been
up.
there
He's
for
like
every Dragon
86,
Quest.
right? He's old.
He's done every numbered Dragon Quest title, and he even did 11.
hmm One thing,
And
one thing.
he's still
Go ahead.
going strong.
Yeah, he's like 86 years old. But one thing I found out that was kind of interesting was that Nobuo, the composer for Final Fantasy, he actually cited him as the composer for Dragon Quest as one of his early influences for video game music. And I think you can hear a little bit of his style in Nobuo's work. Now, Nobuo has his own style and everything like that, so I'm not trying to say that he's copied his music, but you can definitely tell that it's definitely in some of the older music as well from like the early like Nintendo games and even up to Final Fantasy IV and such. You can kind of hear that influence in there, and that was probably looking at Dragon Warrior or Dragon Quest games and seeing like how you structure them musically. And obviously, it's not like he's like copy and pasting melodies or anything like that. But you know what I mean when I say influence, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're both going off the same philosophy, which is make a simple but effective track, something that you can hum in your head. And
Sure.
that's the way they go with both of them up to this day. And they both do so magnificent with it. They don't do like the same exact thing, but they go off the same philosophy, which makes them feel similar in that regard. Like especially during the early era, uh, they do have very similar. They kind of went off on their own thing because the composer of Dragon Quest still likes to use that very simple older day type of melody with his tracks, while Nobuo still likes to make them simple but modern feeling also. So their philosophies are the same. How they may go about it is just slightly different.
Yeah, so I mean, like it's still good, but I can still hear that base foundation. That sounds like they're starting in the same place. It's just obviously they went their own separate ways. So,
Oh yeah,
but
that's a better way to put it.
yeah, for sure. But yeah, man, it's real good. I think one thing that we should probably address. Probably should have addressed it earlier in this episode when we were talking about the story. But how did you feel about? Or how do you feel about the series as a whole? And I think this is a series-wide thing, that the main protagonist pretty much does not speak. Do you like that?
It depends on the context of the game.
Mm-hmm.
Like I didn't like it
really
until Zillia 2 because it didn't make sense. It was such a narrative heavy game. Dragon Quest is not as narrative heavy, and they do a good job in making sure that you're interacting with the main character, and that everything is still centered around you.
Mm-hmm.
Which they still do a very good job on without having you to speak. Because the Dragon Quest, the hero is always supposed to reflect you. And and how you go about things in your own way, or like how your character would interact in
Sure.
a way. It's very it's just like Chrono Trigger and Zelda in that way, and you are kind of an established character. If I'm put my words in my mouth real quick, but it's like you're going through you're this character, but and you're going, and he does kind of have set characteristics, but how you go about it is still up to your imagination. And Dragon Quest still does that very well every time.
Yeah. I'm in the middle on it because I liked it in Chrono Trigger. I thought it worked really well for Chrono Trigger. And I think a lot of it had to do with just the dynamic of the party. They really, and it seemed to mesh well with Chrono's character for him to be kind of quiet like that. Whereas he's running around with all these girls and they're very talkative. It seemed to counterbalance the other characters really well. In this game, it didn't. I wouldn't say that it hurt the game, but I feel like it would have been a lot. For me, I think it would have been a better story if the character actually spoke, because the whole thing is the whole character or the story arc for the character. It's very, very personal. I mean, he saw his dad die. He's trying to find his mom. And like, there's certain scenes where like the character should be saying something and they're not. Like when you go back with Harry and you recapture his kingdom from that imposter queen, you find out that the Harry's stepmother, she was literally not the imposter, but she herself said, no, like I sent people to kill your dad. Like I mowed over your whole city and like killed all these people because like I was just angry, but I realize now that's wrong. And like your main character is just like standing there, and then like you're just like, okay, now you can just walk away. And I'm just looking at it like, if this character could speak, like they should say something like, why? Why did you do that? You're an evil person. Like I think that like that character needed to say something in those scenes. Or I don't know. There's a handful of times where I just felt like it would have been better if the character actually spoke. I mean, even during the journey, if while he's searching for clues towards his mother, if every time he came into a city, like he would hear like a little like a new city, he'd hear like a little like snicker about like some new piece of information, and he would get excited and then realize like, oh, it didn't go anywhere. And like, I don't know, if just having that like interaction as a character, as his own individual person, I think it would have made more sense. But I don't know. That's just me. I'm sure it differs from game to game how well it works, but I think this game would have been a little bit better if he didn't go that route with that character. Now, they do that in every single Dragon Quest game, right?
Yes, they do, and I'm okay with it. I think they communicate it. I think they communicate to you very well what's going on in the story and how they interact with your character to not make myself believe, oh, it's absolutely necessary that this character needs to talk. And if anything like that, I feel like sometimes like the kind of magic of it is I feel like I put my own kind of dialogue or how I would react to a situation like that, because I'm a very big person on actions speak louder than words. And Dragon Quest, games like Dragon Quest and Zelda and like Chrono Trigger and stuff like that, they do a very good job on that philosophy of action speaking louder than words. And I mean, that's the kind of games like, of course I love the narrative heavy games and like strong main protagonists and such, but I also love when you can just do these kind of things also. And it kind of brings more of the video game aspect out more than the story aspect out, which I can appreciate to that extent also. Like I've said before, I understand if some people are kind of off-put by that or like difference in taste with it, which is perfectly fine. No one's wrong for thinking like that. But that's just how I personally look at it, is it's an opportunity to express myself into the game more than the game doing it for me.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. I think in most situations, I wouldn't have an issue. I think just like I said with this one, just to reiterate, I think it mainly had to do with the fact that this story in particular, I don't feel meshed as well as it could have with that type of character. Just because, like I said, it's such a personal journey. And for large parts of the game, I mean, you don't have any other characters with you besides your monsters. So it just, you don't have that counterbalance. In Chrono Trigger, you had these very talkative people that were constantly chattering about something, that would kind of fill that void where you can just interject yourself as Chrono. But, with this game, like, it's not like your slime's talking to your, saber or something like that. Like there's large portions where nobody's talking. But when you do have characters in your party, they are talking to you. They are interacting with you. So it's not like it's entirely not involving you in the plot, but I think you are right in that it's more of a preference thing. So I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, you're more than entitled to that opinion. That's the thing with Dragon Quest in particular. If you're someone who like really likes games like Final Fantasy and like RPGs that follow along the lines of like more, recent Final Fantasies or like ones during the PlayStation era and stuff. Mm-hmm. You got to kind of go in with an open mind on Dragon Quest in that regard, because Dragon Quest is a game that very much, like even up till the day with Dragon Quest XI, it very much sticks to the roots of old school RPG mechanics and setup and presentation with it, despite having a very nice modern looking coat of paint on it.
Sure.
And as long as you're open to that and enjoy systems like that, like I'm a retro nut. So, of course I love stuff like that. And I don't know if I ever mentioned this before in any previous episode, but Dragon Quest is my favorite RPG series. If you ask me what it is, I may talk about Final Fantasy more, but Dragon Quest is the one that I always love and the one I love to go back to, because I guess it's not as much to talk about because Dragon Quest is so consistently good that there's not much to talk about except phrasing it, for me at least. And Final Fantasy is just like a rocking boat. It's like one time it's great and the next time it's not. And I have much more to complain about with Final Fantasy, which is why I talk about it so much. But Dragon Quest is just, it's just always that. It's that one series, like that and Zelda are like the ones that are like, I always know it's going to be good. Even like if like there may be weaker titles in the series, it's like, I always know that I'm just going to have some form of enjoyable time with it. It's like, because they know what works and they just make it better.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I enjoyed the game. It took me a while to like really grasp the full gravity of the entire story, and I think a lot of the payoff for the story happens in the third act of the game that really, I think, makes the game special. For me, the story was, at first, when I first started playing it, like I really, really liked it because, like I said, there's a lot of interaction with your father. Maybe it didn't seem quite as unusual that the main character wasn't speaking because it was a kid. And like there was a lot of presentation elements that I liked, like when you're going through that haunted castle and the lights keep going out, and like every time the lights would flicker, you'd see these skeletons moving and stuff. Like there's a lot of like attention to detail that I really enjoyed in the story from that perspective. But once it hits that second act, like it kind of like dies down a little bit, and it's like, okay, now it's about adventure time. But once we get into that third act and it really starts to flesh out the story some more, I really realized like it's actually a different type of story than like what you might get in Final Fantasy, right? Whereas in Final Fantasy games, they tend to focus on like a year and a half, right? That all these things happen. Whereas this game takes its time, tells a story over like literally like an entire lifetime. All these different things happen, and it's just a different type of story, and it's still good, but they're just two different types of storytelling techniques,
It's got nice little emotional moments also. Like, you remember the guard that was brother to one of the slave, or like Maria was her name, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was sister to her, and he's the one that helps you escape in the barrels out of there. Yeah. And then when you go back, when the temple is complete, like in the third generation, you find his remains with a note, like talking about like, how he was caught helping them escape, and he sacrificed himself to save his sister. And you come back and you read that note, man. And the first time I read that, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm like, oh man. I was like, oh, that like he did such a noble thing for us and he died for it. Or like when your mother like like holds back Murdaugh, and like the person you've been searching for the entire game just died in front of you like that. Everything you worked for, just like
Hmm.
and she's gone now. And moments like that just really hit you. And I was kind of surprised for a game like that.
Yeah, I mean, it was really good. One moment that really stuck out to me that I really liked was when you're at the fairy kingdom the second time as an adult, and they're like, "Hey, look at this picture. It'll show you your heart and your soul or whatever." And then like you examine it, and it'll take you back to the past, and you're like walking around the city or whatever as yourself, and you get to go talk to your father, and then you talk to yourself, and you have to like trade out the gold orbs or whatever. I remember, I think that was an actual scene that you experienced as a child, right? At the beginning of the game?
Yes, if you're a child, if you play through the beginning of the game again, if you and your child self, if you look around, you'll find your adult self hanging around, and he actually gives you like a motivational, little motivational advice.
Which is
when
the
he's
only
talking to
time
you.
I heard my main character speak.
And that's when he swaps the orb, is when you talk to him.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's really sad. You see like your father, and you know you can't like truly interact with him because you'll mess up the timeline
Hmm.
doing
Yeah,
so.
I mean, it was
And that's
crazy.
a nice touching moment too.
Yeah, and you're trying to tell him like don't go or whatever, and he's like, like it'll be fine. I don't believe in that stuff. I was like, I feel like you should.
You
But
can't
I
change
mean,
time, man.
well, and I was thinking too, like, and this is a little off topic, but if you could change it, would you really? Because yeah, your father would survive, but I feel like Harry would probably be a bad king. You know, if he didn't go through all that.
I don't know if that would be on my hero's first mind
Yeah.
if that was the case, because then again, Harry would not have to be a slave either.
Yeah, but I mean, like, if you remember when you met Harry, he was pretty like stuck up, and it was probably just part of that was probably because he was a kid. But I can't imagine
Royalty.
that he would have like he would have grown up to be such a kind-hearted and like empathetic person if he had not gone through being a slave for 10 years. I feel like that really humbled him, as bad of experience as that probably was. But I wish we had to spend more time with them as slaves. You know, I was
Yeah.
very surprised when they went there, and there was some very like crazy scenes when they're like whipping people and stuff. I was like, Jesus Christ, dude, this is a horrible place. I thought we were going to spend a little bit more time in there because we had been there so long. I thought maybe I'd interact with some people some more, but we were pretty much like we got in there. They showed us a couple bad scenes, and then we were out of that whole scene, you know.
Mhm.
But in general, like I said, I really felt like this game had a strong distinction between the gameplay and the story elements. So it would go back and forth between like, okay, now we're going to develop a lot of story, and then we're just going to do some more dungeons. So once I was able to separate that in my mind, I enjoyed it a lot more. But it took me a while to get used to that kind of flow, because it seemed weird to me. Like I didn't know why we were going to all these different towns, because I felt like we should be searching for the hero or like my mother, right? But for some reason we're just going to all these towns. It didn't seem like I had any reason to be doing that. Like I didn't have a clue. I didn't have like sometimes you would like they'd be like, hey, you should go over here. But most of the time, like I show up to a new town and they'd be like, hey buddy, if you go do this, I'll give you this. And it's just like, okay. And then when you get that, it's like, well, now this unlocks something else. But like, there's no like, I don't know, there's no trail that I'm like chasing. There's no like, there
That's kind
wasn't
of the
like,
magic of it, really, is that, your overall goal is to find the legendary hero, does the Nithian equipment, and to help you get your mother back. And I feel like everything you do in the game, rather if your trail runs cold or not, is still in the same, your goal is still that.
Mhm.
It's just like you have to do a certain thing here to please this other person to get this item that helps you get along in the quest to find the next Zenithian piece to give to the legendary hero. And I feel like if just like Chrono Trigger, like I feel like everything you're doing is in the purpose of your main goal, which I think a lot of RPGs today kind of don't do such a great job of. Like you kind of feel like you're just going off to the side and like why am I even doing this? It's like this has nothing to do with what I'm doing. I'm just randomly helping this person. This feels like filler content. Mm-hmm. But in Dragon Quest, I always feel like my main goal is still there. I'm still doing this for a reason. And I guess one could maybe argue that they sometimes do a weaker job sometimes of conveying that, but the overall goal, I believe, is still there very much. Hey guys, it's Eric here. Hey, sorry about the technical issues that just happened. The last 10 minutes got cut off for unknown reasons. We're definitely going to look into that next time. But for the last 10 minutes, we're essentially talking about if we could recommend Dragon Quest V or not. Both of us were pretty much on the agreement that it is a game definitely worth trying out, and you definitely should pick up any version of it, rather it be the DS version, the PS2 version, or the Super Nintendo version. And again, sorry about the technical issues there, but next week we are going to be talking about, in particular, the new DLC for Final Fantasy 15 episode Ignis, and talk about the highlights of that, if we liked it or don't like it. Me as a 15 fan and all that. But I will check it out. I am legitimately interested in seeing what happened with content with Ravis. And I'm sure we'll be talking about other topics next week also on top of that. So please stay tuned. And thanks, guys. Take care.